through the train window. Burckhardt had just witnessed something that shattered 3 years of Nazi propaganda. Electric light everywhere. Every house, every shop, every street corner burned bright. An ocean of electricity, stretching across the Texas plains at 10 o'clock at night. In Germany, black outlaws had plunged the Reich into darkness since 1940. Even before the war, barely 1 in 5 rural homes had power. Yet here, in a land Nazi radio had called decadent and collapsing, electricity flowed as freely as water. From the train, 1,850 veterans of Rommel's Africa Corps stepped onto the platform, not from cattle cars, but Pullman coaches with cushioned seats, sleeping berths, and dining cars. The entire town of Mexia turned out to see them arrive, unaware that this moment would spark one of the most profound psychological transformations of the war, a slow, devastating collapse of Nazi ideology through nothing more than the visible power of American abundance. The numbers of Allied victory were no longer written on battle maps, but in production statistics, and those numbers were rewriting everything. The captured soldiers thought they knew about their enemies, their homeland, and their cause. The collapse had begun weeks earlier. May 3, 1943, in Tunisia, General Jürgen von Arnim, Rommel's successor, surrendered with roughly 250,000 Axis troops, among them Hauptmann Friedrich Radke, holder of the Iron Cross First Class, twice wounded, and a veteran of France and North Africa. His diary, discovered decades later in the U.S. National Archives, would become a cornerstone for historians studying the psychological unraveling of Nazi belief during captivity. Their journey began in Oran, Algeria, where 30,000 German POWs waited in makeshift camps for transport ships. The sheer efficiency of American organization began to erode their pride from the first day. The U.S. Army processed thousands of prisoners daily. Identification cards, photographs, medical exams, inoculations, all carried out with flawless precision and in fluent German. The first real shock came with the food. Obergefreiter Hans Moyer of the 21st Panzer Division later wrote to his mother, "In Oran, while waiting for ships, the Americans fed us better than we had eaten in 6 months of June 4th. Railroad Street, Mexia, Texas." The pencil shook faintly in Unteroffizier Vera Burckhardt's hand as he wrote in his hidden diary, words that, if discovered, could have condemned him to solitary confinement. "The Americans must be lying to us," he scribbled. "No nation can live in such plenty while fighting a war on 2 fronts. Desert war, white bread, real coffee, meat twice a day. We thought it was propaganda. We didn't realize this was their standard ration. The ships that carried them, Liberty ships, were marvels of mass production. One, the SS Robert E. Peary, had been built in just 4 days and 15 hours. Each ship was made from 250,000 parts built across 32 U.S. states, 3 per day at the height of production. Rather than return empty from supply runs to Europe, they carried 30,000 POWs across the Atlantic every month. During the 2-week crossing, the Germans experienced the second stage of psychological collapse. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann wrote in letters home, "The sailors threw away more food each day than our entire company received in a week. Half-eaten steaks, whole loaves of bread, gallons of milk. They weren't mocking us. To them, it meant nothing. Their supply was endless." Even the ships themselves were revelations. Colonel Wilhelm von Staubern, a Prussian aristocrat, later recalled, "As we neared the American coast, I saw radar spinning above the bridge. We believed only we and the British had such devices. Yet here it was, standard on a cargo ship. That was when I knew Germany had already lost." August 2nd, 1943. Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The sight of America itself annihilated the last illusions of Nazi propaganda. The Norfolk base stretched across 4,300 acres, with cranes unloading dozens of ships at once. In a single day, the base handled more cargo than Hamburg could in an entire week. Gericht Johann Weber, a factory worker before the war, noted in secret, "Each crane lifted what would take 12 men and horses in Germany. They ran on electricity and no coal, no smoke. Everything moved smoothly, endlessly." Then came another revelation, the cars. Parking lots full of them, belonging to dock workers, ordinary laborers driving their own vehicles. In Germany, only the elite and the party owned cars. The much-promised Volkswagen had remained a fantasy. The trains that took them south were another shock. Not boxcars, but full passenger coaches. Pullman cars with beds, dining cars with white tablecloths, even air conditioning. One American sergeant even apologized. "Sorry, it's not cooling properly today." Radke wrote, "We boarded like tourists, not prisoners." We thought such comfort existed only in Hitler's personal train. As the trains rolled from Virginia to Texas, the destruction of Nazi myth became complete. Every town, even the smallest, was alight. Martinsville, Danville, Greensboro, glowing like cities of glass. Factories worked through the night. Parking lots full, neon signs flashing. One soldier wrote in disbelief, "Every American town had more electricity than all of Hamburg." The guards said this was normal since the 1920s. I called him a liar, until I saw it with my own eyes. At each stop, the efficiency and wealth of American workers stunned them. Mechanized coal loaders, electric pumps, automatic lubricators, completing tasks in half the time German crews required. They smoked imported cigarettes, wore fine leather boots, drank Coca-Cola, and tossed half-empty bottles away. Engineer Heinrich Müller calculated that one rail yard used more electricity in an hour than his. Berlin district did in a day. They left lights burning in empty buildings. Fans ran in rooms with no one inside. It was the waste of infinite supply. As the trains moved west through Tennessee, Kentucky, and Missouri, the full scope of American industry revealed itself. Factories the size of cities. Alcoa's aluminum plant alone used more power than all of Munich. At Louisville, 4 massive rubber plants had been built in just 18 months, producing 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber annually, compared to Germany's 120,000 at its best. Erich Hoffmann, a chemist from IG Farben, later recalled, "Each plant was more advanced than anything we built, and there were 4 of them, just in one place." Near Detroit, the Ford Willow Run plant sprawled across 2.5 million square feet, producing a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. Hauptmann Wehrli, a captured Luftwaffe pilot, wrote, "We had been told their aircraft were inferior, but from the train, I saw 17 bombers in assembly. Their precision and speed defied everything we believed." Crossing the Mississippi River into St. Louis, the Germans stared at endless barges, filled with grain, more than Germany's entire 1942 harvest. Farmer Carl Schmidt noted, "They move food as we move ammunition. One barge held enough wheat to feed my village for 5 years. The crane operator ate a sandwich thicker than our ration. In Kansas City, they saw stockyards packed with cattle, meatpacking plants running day and night, workers eating beef sandwiches like it was bread. They ate meat the way we dream of eating bread," wrote one corporal. At last, they reached Camp Hearn, Texas, a POW camp built in just 4 months. To the Germans, it looked like a small American town. Electric lights, hot showers, flush toilets, steam heating. The hospital amazed them. X-rays, modern surgery, and penicillin, a drug they had only heard rumors about. Dr. Friedrich Bauer wrote, "They used penicillin freely, even on prisoners. Our own men were dying for lack of simple sulfur drugs. Even the kitchens were lessons in abundance. Electric mixers, walk-in refrigerators, automated dishwashers. Meals included milk, eggs, vegetables, and meat." Feldwebel Otto Krebs confessed, "We threw away more food than my family had seen in 3 years. Perfectly good bread, discarded because regulations required a surplus. I wept as I threw it away." By September 1943, POWs were being sent to work on American farms and factories, and that, more than anything, destroyed the last embers of Nazi ideology. They saw everything with their own eyes, endless fields of wheat and corn, machines doing the work of hundreds, families with cars, radios, refrigerators. At a cotton gin near Houston, Herbert Lang watched one machine process in an hour what his entire village could in a month. Electricity powered everything. Brought to 90% of Texas farms by 1943 for the captured men of the Africa Corps. The truth was inescapable. The war had already been lost, not on the battlefield, but in the factories, farms, and living rooms of a nation whose strength came not from ideology, but from industrial might and limitless resources. The farmer who owned the cotton gin wasn't anyone important, Lang observed. He wasn't aristocracy, nor a party official, just an ordinary man. Yet he had electricity, running water, a truck, a car, and even a tractor. His laborers, including black workers, ate lunches that contained more food than German workers saw in an entire week. And this wasn't exceptional. Every farm they passed looked the same. In Nebraska, German prisoners worked in the sugar beet fields and saw agricultural technology that defied everything they knew. One combine harvester, they learned, could replace 100 men. The fields stretched endlessly toward the horizon, some larger than entire German districts. Farmers spoke casually of crop yields that Germans would have considered impossible, 60 bushels of wheat per acre, compared to Germany's best average of 30. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann, assigned to a farm near Scottsbluff, wrote, "The farmer's son, just 16, drove a tractor worth more than everything my father ever owned." When I mentioned this, he laughed and said it wasn't even a particularly good tractor. His father was waiting for a new model from John Deere. But the greatest shock awaited those sent to work near American factories. Although the Geneva Convention banned POWs from working directly on war materials, they were often employed in industries that supported military production. This allowed thousands of captured Germans to see the astonishing scale of U.S. industry firsthand. At a Campbell's soup factory in New Jersey, prisoners watched machines process more tomatoes in a single day than a German factory could manage in a month. The plant operated mostly with women and elderly men. The young were away fighting. Yet its productivity surpassed pre-war levels. Stabsfeldwebel Ernst Wagner, who had worked in a German food plant before the war, noted everything was automated. Conveyor belts moved by electricity. Machines filled cans automatically. Steam cookers processed hundreds at once. An elderly woman oversaw controls that replaced 50 German workers, and she did it while sipping coffee and listening to the radio. Near Detroit, prisoners unloading coal at a power station saw the industrial giant of the River Rouge complex across the water. That plant alone employed 100,000 workers producing jeeps, aircraft engines, and tanks. It consumed 1.5 million kilowatts of electricity daily, more than the entire city of Hamburg. Oberreiter Franz Kellner wrote, "From the ship we saw parking lots packed with cars, thousands of them. In Germany, even officers rarely owned cars. Here, factory workers had their own. Some even had two, one for work, one for family. We thought the guards were joking." By the winter of 1943, American intelligence officers began noticing what they called ideological collapse syndrome among German POWs. The Office of the Provost Marshal General's Secret Special Projects Division recorded that increasing numbers of prisoners were asking for American books, newspapers, and educational materials. Major Paul Noland wrote in a December 1943 report, "They no longer argue when presented with production statistics. They have seen too much. Even the most loyal Nazis are silent now. They may still love Germany, but none speak of victory anymore." Even the newspapers printed by prisoners themselves began to change. Der Ruf, the call, published at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, slowly shifted from patriotic defiance to thoughtful discussions of democracy, economics, and the reconstruction of Europe. The anti-Nazi editors found an audience increasingly ready to listen. Lieutenant Hermann Goetz, once a proud member of the 10th Panzer Division, wrote in a letter that passed censorship, "We were told America was a mongrel nation, weak, divided, ruled by Jews, incapable of true strength. But every day I am here, I see the opposite. This is the most organized, united, and powerful nation on earth. We were fed fairy tales by criminals." The next major blow to Nazi ideology came after Italy's surrender in September 1943. Italian POWs who agreed to cooperate were placed into Italian service units, given better housing, pay, and freedom. The Germans watched in disbelief as their former allies worked alongside Americans, ate in local restaurants, and even courted American women. Heinrich Friedrich Schulz wrote, "The Italians betrayed us, yet the Americans treat them better than we treated them as allies. They work freely, earn wages, send money home. The Americans show them no hatred. This democracy we were taught to despise seems far more honorable than our own." Then came Christmas of 1943, a holiday that forever changed many prisoners' beliefs. American churches, civic groups, and charitable organizations sent over 500,000 Christmas packages to German POWs, men who had been their enemies only months before. Each box contained cigarettes, candy, soap, and games. At Camp Hearn, Texas, the local Methodist choir sang Christmas carols in German. Townswomen sent homemade cakes and cookies. Boy Scouts delivered handmade Christmas cards. Oberleutnant Walter Müller, whose brother had died in Hamburg during Allied bombings, wrote, They know we are their enemies. Many have sons fighting against us, yet they show kindness, not hatred. This isn't propaganda, it's genuine compassion. What kind of people treat their enemies this way? Only those who are completely certain of victory and confident in their strength. The Christmas feast itself felt surreal. Turkey, ham, potatoes, vegetables, pies, and ice cream. Food in quantities unimaginable in wartime Germany. The prisoners ate until they were sick. Feldwebel Hans Sens wrote, "We dined like kings, better than our generals, better than our party leaders." And the guards told us this wasn't special. This was a normal American Christmas. If they feed us like this, what must their soldiers be eating? By early 1944, over 40,000 German POWs were enrolled in educational courses across America. They studied English, history, science, and mathematics. The University of Chicago offered correspondence lessons. Professors from Stanford traveled to the camps to lecture on democracy and economics. The hunger for learning was immense. Men who had been raised on Nazi censorship discovered free libraries, universities open to all classes, and scientific research unmatched anywhere in the world. They read American newspapers that presented multiple viewpoints, something unthinkable back home. Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, a physicist formerly at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, attended lectures on atomic physics at Camp Shelby. He later wrote, "American professors, including Jewish refugees from Germany, have taught us without bitterness. They shared knowledge freely, believing science belonged to all humanity. They were years ahead of us. Their generosity was beyond our understanding." The camp cinemas showed ordinary Hollywood films, not propaganda, but stories about love, loss, and resilience. Gone with the Wind revealed a nation that could show its own suffering and triumph. The Grapes of Wrath depicted poverty and injustice, yet Americans allowed prisoners to watch it openly. Lieutenant Joseph Kramer wrote, "They hide nothing. They show their failures, their pain, their conflicts, and it makes them stronger, not weaker." In Germany, such honesty meant death. Here it is called patriotism. By the spring of 1944, as American industry reached its peak, German prisoners were working in mills, canneries, and steel plants, seeing with their own eyes the power of democracy in motion. At the Higgins Boat Factory in New Orleans, they unloaded steel that became landing craft for D-Day. The factory produced 700 boats a month with 20,000 parts each, employing 20,000 workers, many of them women and African Americans. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmermann wrote, "We were told democracy was chaos, that women and Negroes were inferior. Yet here they work together, efficiently, tirelessly, 24 hours a day. They build in a month what our Navy built in a year." At Republic Steel in Ohio, prisoners witnessed furnaces producing 10,000 tons of steel every day, more than the Ruhr region's peak output. Oberreiter Paul Hartmann, who had once worked at Krupp, wrote, "They waste more steel in spillage than we could produce. Their workers complain about overtime while achieving what we never could." Even with forced labor, the harvest of 1944 finally destroyed the myth of American weakness completely. German prisoners across the Midwest watched farms that could feed entire nations. In Kansas, a single farm's wheat output surpassed that of entire German provinces. Combines swept across the plains like ships across a golden ocean, each harvesting 100 acres a day. Unteroffizier Franz Weber, a farmer from East Prussia, wrote, "One American farmer, with his machinery, accomplishes what it takes 100 German farmers to do." They showed me aerial photographs, endless, golden plains of wheat stretching across thousands of square miles. Even if half their harvest were lost, America would still produce more grain than the rest of Europe combined. In California's Central Valley, German prisoners worked in vast orchards where the rows of fruit trees seemed to go on forever. They watched in disbelief as perfectly edible fruit was thrown away for the smallest imperfections. Fruit that people in wartime Germany would have cherished. Entire harvests were sometimes plowed back into the soil just to keep market prices stable. They destroyed food to control prices, wrote Gefreiter Otto Schultz. Mountains of oranges bulldozed into pits because there were too many. We begged them to send the fruit to our starving families in Germany. But the guards, though sympathetic, told us it wasn't possible. To the prisoners, this shocking waste became the ultimate proof of America's limitless abundance. Then came June 6, 1944, the D-Day invasion of Normandy. When the news reached the POW camps, it marked the final collapse of Nazi ideology among the prisoners. The sheer scale of the Allied operation, 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and 150,000 men landing in a single day was beyond anything Germany could have imagined. At Camp Shelby, prisoners watched newsreels showing the massive invasion, endless lines of ships, floating harbors built from scratch, and a supply chain that delivered 13,000 tons of materials daily across open beaches. As they watched, they realized their homeland was being crushed by the very nation they had been told was weak and decadent. Gefreiter Friedrich von Toben later wrote, "We knew then that everything was lost, not just the war, but the entire Nazi dream. We had challenged the greatest industrial power on earth with myths and arrogance. We sent horses against tanks, rifles against machine guns, and blind faith against unlimited resources." Throughout their captivity, what affected the German prisoners most was not American wealth, but American humanity. Despite Nazi propaganda portraying Americans as soft and sentimental, the POWs discovered a nation confident enough in its strength to show mercy. When Gefreiter Hans Müller learned that his son had died in the bombing of Hamburg, the American camp commander personally delivered the Red Cross telegram and offered his condolences. When Lieutenant Paul Fischer's wife wrote that she was struggling to feed their children, American church groups gathered food parcels and sent them to her in Germany, enemy territory. They made a clear distinction, wrote Helmut Otto. They said they were fighting Hitler, not the German people. We thought it was propaganda, but they proved it was genuine. They were preparing us to rebuild Germany, not to destroy it. Medical treatment in the camps left a lasting impression. German doctors were invited to work alongside American medical staff, learning new techniques and using advanced equipment. Prisoners received surgeries and treatments that only Germany's elite could have afforded. Mental health care, virtually unknown in the Wehrmacht, was offered to traumatized soldiers. Dr. Friedrich Bauer recalled, "They treated suicide attempts with compassion, not punishment. Prisoners suffering breakdowns were given therapy, not beatings. Their humanity toward enemies showed us a kind of strength we had never understood, the confidence that comes from true power." By March 1945, the secret re-education initiative had achieved extraordinary results. Over 25,000 German prisoners voluntarily enrolled in classes about democracy, economics, and political philosophy. Camp newspapers began publishing thoughtful articles on constitutional government and civil rights. Officers who once swore oaths to Hitler were now discussing how to apply American agricultural methods to rebuild Germany. "We became missionaries for democracy," admitted Gustav Hermann Goering, no relation to the Reichsmarshal, in a 1975 interview. "Not because they forced us, but because we saw it work. Ordinary Americans lived better than our nobility. We wanted that for Germany." The transformation was so complete that U.S. officials grew concerned about the prisoners' enthusiasm for the American way of life. Some even requested permission to stay after the war. Others began writing to American women, eventually marrying and immigrating in the 1950s. Then, in April 1945, came the final revelation. As Allied forces liberated the concentration camps, the horrific footage was shown to the German POWs. At first, many refused to believe it, insisting it was propaganda, but the evidence was undeniable. Testimony from American soldiers, film reels, and letters from home confirmed the truth. The psychological impact was devastating. Those who had clung to pride in German honor were crushed by the realization that their nation's cause was not only lost, but evil. Lieutenant Walter Schmidt wrote, "We believed we were fighting for civilization. We discovered we were its destroyers. The Americans we called weak and decadent showed us what true civilization meant." When the war ended in May 1945, German POWs awaited repatriation with mixed emotions. They had lived in a country that contradicted everything they had been taught. As prisoners, they had eaten better and been treated with more respect than as soldiers of the Reich. In their final months, the Americans focused on preparing them to return home. They provided vocational training, agricultural instruction, and lessons in democracy. Prisoners even learned about the Marshall Plan before its official announcement, understanding that the U.S. intended not to punish Germany but to rebuild it. "They gave us knowledge, skills, and hope," wrote Friedrich von Toben. "They turned defeated soldiers into future citizens." Between 1945 and 1946, 371,683 German POWs were repatriated from American camps. They returned to a nation shattered and starving, but they brought with them something priceless: first-hand experience of how a democratic, industrial society functioned. Many became instrumental in rebuilding West Germany. Hans Kroll, once a prisoner at Camp Shelby, became West Germany's ambassador to the United States. Walter Hallstein, who taught democracy classes at Camp Koch, later became the first president of the European Commission. Rüdiger von Marr, held at Camp Herne, became Germany's permanent representative to the United Nations. Edward Ackerman, a POW at Fort Robinson, led post-war agricultural reform. They carried American ideas into German industry, politics, and farming, laying the foundation for the West German economic miracle of the 1950s. We learned that prosperity comes from freedom, not conquest, Hans Kroll wrote in his memoirs. That democracy creates wealth, diversity builds strength, and treating workers with dignity increases productivity. Those lessons, learned as prisoners, rebuilt our nation. Historians later described the German POW experience in America as one of the most successful re-education programs in history, achieved not through propaganda, but through lived reality. Every full meal, every electric light, every working toilet was a quiet argument against Nazism. The prisoners were convinced, not by words, but by the overwhelming evidence of American society in action. Dr. Arnold Kramer summarized it best. America won the propaganda war not through clever slogans, but through truth. The prisoners were converted by prosperity. Of the 371,683 German POWs held in the United States, fewer than 1% ever attempted escape. Surveys later revealed that 95% rated their treatment as good or excellent. Decades later, many former prisoners maintained friendships with the American families they had met during the war. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the war's end, over 500 of them returned to Texas for a reunion. They brought their children and grandchildren to show them where their transformation began. Former Obergefreiter Hans Wehr, once held at Fort Robinson, Nebraska, and later a physician in Maine, spoke at the gathering. Life in the camps was, for many of us, better than what we had known in Germany. We discovered running water, central heating, and plenty of food. But more importantly, we discovered dignity. The scale of the German POW experience in America, the magnitude of this story can be seen in numbers that are as astonishing as the change itself. Over 500 camps spread across 45 states, all except Nevada, North Dakota, and Vermont. 175 main camps and 325 branch camps, each housing between 250 and 12,000 prisoners, built in an average of 90 days. By 1945, there were 371,683 German prisoners of war in the U.S., part of the 425,000 total. Axis POWs held, peak population, May 1945, new arrivals, 20,000 per month in 1943, 30,000 after D-Day, and up to 60,000 in the war's final months. Their contribution to America's wartime economy was immense. 14 million man-days of agricultural labor, 100 million board feet of lumber processed, a total labor value of $230 million in 1940s currency. Each prisoner earned about 80 cents per day, filling vital labor shortages in 46 states. Despite their numbers, escapes were almost unheard of. Only 2,222 escape attempts, less than 0.6%, and none successful long-term, most. Escapees were captured within 24 hours, not a single American civilian was ever harmed. Education and transformation. Within the camps, education thrived. Over 40,000 prisoners enrolled in academic or vocational programs. 135 camp newspapers published. 30,000 studied English. 15,000 learned trades. 8,000 took university-level correspondence courses. Even after the war, around 5,000 former POWs immigrated to the U.S. permanently. 12,000 plus stayed in touch with American families for an average of 31 years. Many returned later as tourists or business partners. Surveys conducted after the war revealed 95% rated their treatment as good or excellent. 74% said captivity changed their worldview. 61% became interested in democracy. Fewer than 10% still held strong Nazi beliefs by 1945. The true victory. These men did not just witness history, they were transformed by it. Their defeat became their education, their captivity, their liberation from ideology. America's greatest victory in the end was not won on the battlefield, but within its prison camps, where the overwhelming evidence of democratic prosperity accomplished what armies could not. The transformation of enemy minds. The German soldiers had arrived believing in their own superiority and America's weakness. They left knowing the opposite was true. They had seen that America's strength lay not in its weapons, but in its freedom, in the creativity of ordinary people. The trains that carried them into captivity in 1943 had brought warriors of the Third Reich. The ships that carried them home in 1946 returned architects of democracy. They had seen the future, and it worked. The lessons they took home laid the foundation for Europe's rebirth. The Marshall Plan, the Atlantic Alliance, and the economic miracle of post-war West Germany. They had seen with their own eyes what free societies could achieve when guided by dignity, equality, and cooperation. These German prisoners had arrived expecting to find a weak, divided America. Instead, they discovered an industrial giant powered by unity and compassion. They came as enemies but left as believers. Their story stands as a testament to a timeless truth, that the most powerful weapon in any nation's arsenal is not fear, but example. Not destruction, but creation. Not hatred, but humanity. In the end, America's secret weapon was not its machines of war, but its ability to turn prisoners into friends and enemies into advocates for freedom. And in that transformation lay the foundation for a better world,